There are properties in Switzerland selling right now for less than a single parking space costs in Geneva. Not a parking garage. One marked rectangle of concrete, the kind you buy with an apartment, can change hands for 60,000 francs, and in the prime districts well past 100,000. And somewhere in the same small country, a family home with land sells for not much more. Almost nobody outside Switzerland is talking about this gap. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why it exists and why most buyers never see it. Start with the headline that everyone knows. Switzerland is one of the most expensive property markets in the world. The average apartment carries a median asking price of CHF 865,000. The average price per square meter for a flat has climbed above CHF 8,900. In the prized postcodes of Zurich and Geneva, that figure crosses CHF 20,000 per square meter. These are the numbers that travel. These are the numbers in every headline about Swiss housing. But a national average is a strange thing. It hides as much as it reveals. An average is a single point standing in for a vast range, and in Switzerland that range is wider than almost anywhere. Behind the calm figure of CHF 8,900 per square meter sits a market pulled apart at both ends. A market where two properties of identical size and quality can differ in price by a factor of 5, depending on nothing more than which valley they sit in. To see how the average deceives, picture two apartments. Each is 100 square meters. Each has been recently renovated, each sits in a well-maintained building, and each comes with the same Swiss standard of construction. The first is in central Zurich, where it costs around CHF 1.5 million. The second is in a watchmaking town in the Neuchâtel Mountains, where it costs around CHF 325,000. Average those two together, and you get a comfortable, misleading middle number that describes neither of them. The average is a fiction that both properties hide behind. The real market lives at the extremes. To understand the anomaly, you have to understand how Switzerland is actually built. It is not one housing market, it is 26 of them, stacked into one small country. Each canton sets its own taxes, runs its own economy, and carries its own level of demand. The federal structure that defines Swiss politics also fractures its property market into pieces that barely resemble one another. This fragmentation is not an accident of geography. It is the deliberate design of the Swiss state. Power in Switzerland flows upward from the cantons, not downward from the center. Each canton guards its own tax rates, its own regulations, its own character with a fierceness that has held for centuries. The consequence for property is profound. There is no single national housing market correcting itself toward one price. There are 26 separate markets, each shaped by local wages, local taxes, and local demand, and the gaps between them never close because nothing forces them to. There is the Switzerland of the global headlines. Zurich, the financial capital. Geneva, the city of banks and international organizations. Zug, the low-tax magnet for corporations and crypto wealth. Basel is home to pharmaceutical giants. The arc of the Lake Geneva shoreline lined with villas. And the famous resorts, Zermatt, Verbier, St. Moritz, where chalets trade for sums that would buy entire streets elsewhere. In Switzerland, the price per square meter runs from CHF 12,000 to well beyond CHF 20,000. This is the Switzerland the world sees. Then there is the other Switzerland. It occupies the same map. It uses the same currency, the same banks, the same famously punctual trains, but its prices belong to a different decade, almost a different country. In the canton of Jura in the far northwest, apartments trade near CHF 3,000 to CHF 5,000 per square meter. In the Neuchâtel Mountains, in the watchmaking towns of Le Locle and La Chaux-de-Fonds, the figure drops near CHF 250. In Glarus, in Uri, in rural Valais, and northern Ticino, the numbers sit far below the national average that the headlines fixate on. How far below? Rural cantons offer property at roughly 40 to 75% less than the major cities. A 5 or 6 room house in Porrentruy, a medieval town in the Jura, can sell for around CHF 350,000. The identical house in Geneva would command well over CHF 1.5 million. That is not a small discount. That is the same dwelling, in the same country, under the same laws, priced more than 4 times apart. The data backs this at every level. Analysts who track Swiss prices by canton find the cheapest condominium markets, Jura, Glarus, and Uri, clustered in the range of CHF 4,500 to CHF 6,500 per square meter. At the other end, Zurich, Zug, Geneva, and Baselstadt sit between CHF 12,000 and CHF 15,000, with the very best addresses far above even that. For detached houses, the spread is wider still. The lakeside municipalities of Zurich's so-called Gold Coast reach beyond CHF 18,000 per square meter, While mountain communities in Uri frequently sit below CHF 5500, the same word house describes two objects that share almost nothing but a name and a price tag separated by a factor of 3 or 4. So the anomaly is real, L, and it is enormous. But a price gap alone does not explain itself. The question nobody raises is the one that actually matters. Why does this gap persist? In an efficient market, cheap things attract buyers until they are no longer cheap. Money flows toward value. So why has the money not flowed? Why are these towns still cheap year after year, decade after decade, while an hour away the prices climb past reason? The first part of the answer is jobs. Swiss prosperity is concentrated. The high salaries cluster in a handful of economic centers, and those centers are the expensive ones. Zurich's finance sector, Geneva's institutions, Basel's pharmaceutical campuses, Zug's corporate headquarters. These places generate the incomes that bid property prices upward. The affordable regions, by contrast, sit outside the high-wage zones. The Jura, rural Valais, Glarus, and the Neuchâtel highlands. There is work there, but less of it, and it pays less. Local demand simply cannot push prices the way a banker's salary in Zurich can. The history of these regions explains part of their predicament. Many of the affordable towns were built around a single industry that has since contracted. The Neuchâtel Mountains rose on watchmaking, and when that industry shed jobs through the 20th century, the towns did not collapse, but they did not boom either. They settled into a long, stable quiet. Glarus was an early industrial center, its valley once lined with textile mills, and when that work faded, the population steadied rather than surged. These are not failing places. They are places that already had their economic peak, and whose prices reflect a calm present rather than a speculative future. A town that has already grown does not carry the speculative premium that a town expected to grow does, and in property, the premium for an imagined future is often the largest part of the price. These towns simply stop charging for a future that the market no longer expects, and the result is a present that anyone can still afford. The second part of the answer is a demand of a different kind, the demand that comes from outside. In expensive Switzerland, buyers arrive from everywhere. International executives, returning expats, and global investors are looking for a safe harbor for their money. That outside demand stacks on top of local demand and drives prices into the stratosphere. The affordable regions receive almost none of it. No international fund is chasing a flat in Tramelan. No global investor is bidding up a house in Glarus. Without that outside pressure, prices stay tethered to what local people can actually afford to pay. It is worth sitting with how unusual that is. In most of the developed world, the cheapest beautiful places do not stay cheap for long. The moment a remote mountain town or a forgotten medieval center is discovered, outside buyers arrive, prices climb, and within a decade the locals are priced out of their own streets. This pattern has repeated across the French Alps, the Italian lakes, and the Spanish coast. Switzerland's affordable regions have, for the most part, escaped it. The cheap town that stays cheap is a rare creature, and Switzerland is one of the few countries that still produces it in any number. But there is a third force, and it is the one most outsiders never learn about. It is written into Swiss law, and it shapes the entire market from above. If this kind of property intelligence is useful to you, this channel covers it every week. The overlooked corners of the Swiss market and the rules that govern them. It is worth keeping on your radar. The law is called Lex Koller. It has governed the purchase of Swiss real estate by foreigners for decades, and it does something that most property markets in the world do not. It restricts who is allowed to buy. A non-resident foreigner cannot simply purchase Swiss property the way they might in France, Spain, or the United States. The right to buy is limited, permits are required, and in many cantons, the number of permits issued to foreign holiday home buyers is capped every single year. Consider what that does to the market. In most desirable countries, when prices are low, foreign money pours in and lifts them. That is the mechanism that has gentrified coastlines and mountain villages across Europe. Lex Koller blocks that mechanism. It places a wall between the world's mobile capital and the Swiss property market. The cheap Swiss town stays cheap, not because nobody wants it, but because most of the people who might want it are legally prevented from buying it. The origins of Lex Koller reach back into the worry that gave it its purpose. Switzerland is small, its land is finite, and its position at the heart of Europe makes it permanently desirable to outside money. Left unchecked, foreign demand could have bought up the most beautiful corners of the country and pushed Swiss residents out of the market entirely. The law was the answer, a deliberate barrier raised to keep Swiss land in reach of the people who actually live on it. Whatever one thinks of it, the effect on prices is undeniable. It severs the link between global capital and local property that drives prices upward almost everywhere else. The mechanics are precise. A foreigner without Swiss residence faces real limits on what they can buy and where. Holiday home purchases are governed by an annual federal quota divided among the cantons, and many of the most scenic cantons receive only a small allocation or restrict it further on their own authority. Some of the very regions where property is cheapest are also among the hardest for a non-resident foreigner to buy into. The affordability and the restrictions on travel are together. One protects the other. So now the picture sharpens. Three forces hold these prices down all at once. Jobs are concentrated elsewhere. Outside demand bypasses the region. And the law itself keeps foreign capital from flooding in. Each force alone would soften prices. Together, they freeze them. They create pockets of the country where, for reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of the homes, property remains genuinely, durably affordable. And here is where the human reality enters. Because these are not empty places. People live full lives in this other Switzerland. In Delamont, the capital of Jura, families buy modern flats for under CHF 400, 00 and commute less than an hour to the pharmaceutical salaries of Basel. In Sierre, in the sunny Rhone Valley of Valais, a couple buys a two-bedroom apartment for the price of a parking allocation in a Verbier development, a short drive up the mountain. In the Neuchâtel Highlands, a young family owns a flat in a UNESCO World Heritage town for a third of what the national average suggests they should pay. Walk through Delamont and the contradiction is everywhere. The old town is medieval, all stone arcades and painted fountains, the kind of place that would be overrun and unaffordable if it sat an hour from Paris instead of an hour from Basel. Yet the flats above those streets sell for sums that would not buy a studio in the cities the residents commute to. The same is true in the watchtowns of the Neuchâtel Mountains, where entire neighborhoods carry UNESCO World Heritage protection and where a heritage-listed apartment can still be had for the price of a deposit elsewhere. The beauty is real, the history is real. Only the price refuses to behave the way the surroundings suggest it should. These people are not missing out on Switzerland. They have Swiss schools, Swiss healthcare, Swiss safety, and Swiss infrastructure. The trains run on time for them, too. What they have given up is proximity to the expensive centers, and in exchange, they have gained something most Swiss residents quietly envy. They own their homes outright, or nearly so, in a country where the home ownership rate is one of the lowest in the developed world, precisely because prices everywhere else are so high. That last point deserves weight. Switzerland has one of the lowest rates of home ownership in the wealthy world. Most Swiss people rent for their entire lives because buying is out of reach. In that context, the affordable regions are not a curiosity. They are one of the only routes to ownership that an ordinary household has left. The numbers behind that ownership gap are stark. Across Switzerland as a whole, the majority of people rent rather than own, a pattern almost unique among wealthy nations, where ownership is usually the norm. The reason is not cultural preference alone, it is arithmetic. When a modest city apartment costs well over 1 million francs, and Swiss mortgage rules demand a substantial deposit in genuine savings, ownership simply slips beyond the reach of ordinary earners. The affordable cantons quietly invert that arithmetic. In Valais, the canton that contains some of the most expensive resorts in the world, the home ownership rate is actually among the highest in the country. Because down in the valley, away from the slopes, ordinary families can still afford to buy. The mountain sells dreams to foreigners. The valley sells homes to its own people. And yet they remain overlooked, because the story the country tells about itself, the story the world repeats, is the story of the expensive Switzerland. So what does this actually mean for someone watching from outside, wondering whether any of this applies to them? Here is the reveal that the headline numbers hide. The Swiss property market is not expensive. Parts of it are among the most expensive on earth, and parts of it are quietly, stubbornly affordable, and the two exist side by side, divided by economics and by law rather than by any real difference in what you get. The CHF 250,000 Swiss home is not a myth. It is a documented, available reality sitting in watchmaking towns and alpine valleys that the world has simply agreed not to look at. This is the layer beneath the layer. The reason these homes stay invisible is not that they are hidden in some literal sense. The listings are public. The prices are published. Anyone can find them in an afternoon of searching. They are invisible because of the story we carry about Switzerland. a story so fixed that it overrides the evidence in front of us. We have decided, collectively, that Switzerland is expensive, and that single belief is so strong that it filters out everything that contradicts it. The cheap towns do not register because they do not fit the picture. The picture wins and the towns stay quiet. And so a CHF 350, zero house in a Swiss town, an hour from a major city, on the same rail network and under the same flag as a million-franc flat in Geneva, can sit on the open market and draw barely a glance from the wider world. Not because it is unavailable, but because almost no one believes it can be real. But the same forces that make these homes cheap also define who can actually claim them. This is the implication, and it is sharper than it first appears. If you live and work in Switzerland with a valid residence permit, this affordable country is open to you. The doors that Lex Koller closes to outsiders stand open to residents. For the expat already working in Zurich or Basel, the person frustrated by rents that consume half their income, this other Switzerland is not a fantasy. It is a train ride away, and it is within reach. Think about what that means in practice for such a person. They already hold the permit. They already earn a city salary. The only barrier left is the one in their own assumptions. The belief that Switzerland is uniformly out of reach. Break that belief, look one canton over, and the path to ownership opens. A flat in the Jura or the Neuchâtel Mountains, bought on a Basel or Zurich income, is not a stretch. It is one of the most favorable property equations available anywhere in the wealthy world, hiding in plain sight inside a country famous for the opposite. If you are buying from abroad purely as an investment or a holiday escape, the same law that keeps these towns affordable is the wall standing in your way. The permits are limited. The cantons that hold the cheapest property often restrict foreign purchases the most tightly. The very affordability you discovered is protected, in part by rules designed to keep people like you from buying it. There is a quiet logic to that, even a kind of justice. The affordability survives because it is shielded from the global money that would erase it everywhere else. It is a strange thing to admire restriction, but consider the alternative. Strip away Lex Koller, open these towns to the world's mobile capital, and within a generation they would look like every other discovered place. Their prices lifted out of local reach. Their residents turned into renters or pushed out altogether. The wall that frustrates the foreign investor is the same wall that lets a young Swiss family in the Jura still buy the home above the medieval square. The restriction is not a flaw in the affordability. It is the reason the affordability still exists. And so the parking space comparison, the one we opened with, turns out to be more than a provocation. It is the whole truth of the Swiss market in miniature. In one city, a slab of concrete to store a car costs as much as a family home costs an hour away. Both prices are real. Both are Swiss. The distance between them is not measured in francs alone. It is measured in jobs that cluster, in capital that is blocked at the border, in a federal patchwork of 26 small markets pretending to be one. Each of those forces could exist alone in another country and barely move the needle. What makes Switzerland singular is that all three operate at once, in the same small space, pulling in the same direction. The concentration of high wages in a few centers, the legal wall against foreign capital, the federal fracturing that lets 26 markets drift apart and never reconverge. Stack them together, and you produce something that should not be possible in a country this wealthy and this admired, a durable, protected affordability that has survived decades of pressure that flattened it everywhere else in Europe. The expensive Switzerland will keep making the headlines. The towers of Zurich, the lakefront of Geneva, the chalet above Verbier. That Switzerland is real, and it is as costly as everyone says. But it is not the only one. One ridge over, one valley back, one French-speaking watchtown up in the Jura Hills, there is another Switzerland entirely. Same flag, same currency, same trains. A fraction of the price. It has been there the whole time. Almost nobody was looking. Now you know exactly where it is, why it stayed cheap, why three separate forces have guarded that low price for decades, and who is actually allowed to walk through the door. The question is no longer whether affordable Switzerland exists. The question is whether you are one of the people the rules were quietly written to let in.